Lorenzo from Comcast, both front-end developers at UberConf 2023. They've agreed to spend a little bit of time with us and talk about the specific developer productivity concerns that exist in front-end development. You know, we often at Gradle, we talk a lot to obviously mobile app developers. We talk a lot to people who work on server-side applications, but we don't always get to talk about some of the challenges that are unique to operating within these frameworks. So I want to give you both a chance to kind of introduce yourselves and kind of talk a little bit about your, I bet you believe that you both said that this was your second UberConf, so talk about your experiences there. But then I want to dive right into that subject. So maybe John, we can start with you.
Sure, sounds good. I'm John Riviello. I'm a front-end engineer at Comcast. I've been there for 16 years doing, again, my expertise is in front-end development. Been doing that for over 25 years at this point. So back in the 90s, Netscape 2, those days, I was there having a good time writing websites then. Been doing a little bit of mobile stuff here and there as well, but my expertise is in the web space.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'm Chris Lorenzo, also been with Comcast for 16 years. Basically got there 2 or 3 weeks after John showed up. So I've been in his shadow the entire time as a web developer. And today I work on the Lightning team, which builds a canvas renderer for WebGL for TV app development. So we do web development, but for TV apps, which is really cool. For performance reasons, it's a lot faster than rendering HTML and CSS. But it's a totally different boat and world that I grew up in of doing HTML and CSS development, now doing like WebGL type stuff.
Interesting, yeah. And just to be clear for the audience, like these are the parts of the framework I imagine where you can like watch TV online, watch things through the Comcast website and everything like that, streaming.
Yeah, so like the Peacock TV app is written with the Lightning framework that my team develops.
Gotcha.
And that is a web framework that you would consider like React and Vue and Angular, except that it renders on a canvas tag versus HTML and CSS.
Interesting. Yeah, the canvas tags that was introduced in HTML5, if I'm mistaken, right? So it was like
way back in the day.
Whole new, but it was. I mean, I remember that too because I come from. To age myself a little bit, I was writing the first web apps I was writing was when you were dropping Perl scripts in a CGI bin directory. You know what I mean? So I remember, and I remember when Ajax hit, and then we abused the hell out of that, and then that turned into WebSockets. So no, I can appreciate where we were and where we are now. But that doesn't mean that it's not without its challenges, right? So when we talk about impediments to productivity, kind of at Gradle, a lot of times we're addressing some of the more conventional impediments to productivity that'll hit by developers who have to build code, right? So this is, hey, I'm in my zone, I'm writing code, it's great. Now I get to wait 15 minutes for a build to complete or a test cycle to complete, or now I have to wait 30 minutes for a CI job to complete or whatever it is. So I'm totally breaking my focus, and now I have to shift back into what I'm doing. And there's other things too, like flaky tests and stuff like that, which are probably common to both of our environments. But I really would love to hear from you, like, not having to deal with builds is a great thing. I want to hear what that's kind of meant. But then beyond that, I want to hear about where are the bottlenecks to productivity? What challenges do you face?
Yeah, I'll go first. So I remember when I started as a web developer, it was you had one JavaScript file, and that was like how pages rendered, and it was 1,000 lines long, and you didn't break it up into multiple files because there was no way really to import them into each other.
Sure.
And you fast forward to today, and it's like you have ES module import statements, and now you have hundreds of imports. And so for build process, it actually has taken a lot longer for the build process because we had Webpack come along, and that's out for like 4 or 5 generations, and that started getting a little bit slower and slower where we were waiting a minute or two as front-end developers for something to happen, especially as you do React and JSX templates. I remember when I first started with React and doing JSX, it's like, wait, everything has to be compiled? This is a slow feedback loop cycle. That's terrible. But I recently was introduced to Vite, the new build tool, and I think it's written in Rust, but it's like 10 to 100 times faster than Webpack. So now it's much faster build process, and it's kind of amazing how much the tools have changed and evolved over time to where, we've reached this critical point where we now have hundreds of imports, so we're building tools that handle that and are much faster at processing that.
Yeah, I'll say again, front development world, it's just we have the luxury of just, I refresh the page, I see it. So like, I say my code, and then we got so lazy that we didn't want to hit refresh. We just, Webpack built in hot reloading so that we could just, develop in one window, next window, I can see it happen automatically. It's great. But like, to your point, like we still have issues with flaky tests, that kind of stuff. And that's legit. Cause like one thing that like, so I talked about when I talks around basically just like CSS, and like, it is really easy to add CSS. It's really hard to remove CSS because it's like, if I remove this class, like why was it there in the first place? It's something users don't even know about. So like what we have on the front end is visual regression tests, which is essentially, taking actual snapshots and comparing those images over time to be able to test that stuff out. But that is not fast. So that's like something that like, to your point in the feedback cycle, like we might commit stuff, local looks great, and then there's a nightly process because it is slow. And that'll actually run through those visual regression tests and say like, hey, actually, this thing did break something we didn't know about. And because of that, then there's new tools that basically, to help you remove CS that you're not even using, like Purge CSS, and like we use Tailwind, and the new version of Tailwind has a library that just removes that for you automatically. Again, saving those feedback cycles, because again, you want to find that stuff as fast as you can, because your local development environment might be different from the final build that Chris is talking about, where you actually go ahead and you do that compilation for production. Every tool we have today is optimized for how can I develop locally quickly and only reload the piece that you need, but still that production build is run through the whole process, and then once in a while something sticks through the cracks.
That's interesting. So it's like, one of the patterns that we use to kind of get around some of these slow build times on server side or in Android is that we have the ability to cache parts of the build, parts of the artifact, right? Not dependencies, but actually like chunks, like a compiled directory of compiled class files or something like that. But it sounds like, when you're dealing with a more reactive framework where it's like, okay, no, I can just make this tiny little tweak here, and then when I hit save, like that's it. I get immediate feedback, and it's just showing up, and it's the way that I want it to look. So that almost it's almost like that takes off the burden of needing something like a cache, because you're getting that sort of immediate visual feedback. So then it's probably fair to say, though, that the majority of the wasted time or the idle time or whatever you want to call it, the wait time, is in these test frameworks that you're using.
Yeah, it's funny. Like we were doing a progressive app workshop on Tuesday, and like the slowest part of that is like, as part of that we kept set up a service worker which does local caching in the browser in between the HTTP cache layer. So like we'll tell the people in the workshop just like, hey, turn that off, but you need to turn it back on to test certain things. So it's like we've got that, caching is every part of computer science is going to affect you and run you up in that first. Yeah, I'm sure Chris has thoughts too to add.
Yeah, caching is the biggest thing that we face. So as long as you disable your cache, you're good to go. But front-end testing is actually like one of the hard parts. Is you get some front-end code bases where we write 500 unit tests, and that unit test might take 5 minutes to run. So my process is, you get it working on your one page, and then I would check it in and let GitHub do the build process, and then 9 out of 10 times it always fails because I didn't run the test locally before checking it in. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of developer I am. But yeah, I don't want to wait for the test to run to tell me that they fail. I like the build process to do it on GitHub, and then I go look at that, and it tells me exactly where it fails. And I got to solve it. But again, it's kind of interesting how build tools have even evolved to where now there's Vite, and there's like Vite Test, I think is the other one, or there's a new testing framework that kind of is a one-to-one replacement for Jest, but a lot faster, like made to run the test because it's written in Rust rather than I think a Node was what Jest is written in.
Right.
So it's great. Whoever these people are who are coming out writing Rust for us and building these amazing tools, thank you very much. Keep up the good work. Keep doing it because we like going fast. But yeah, there's people out there who love that feedback cycle, and they're building new tools to handle the complexity that we're facing now on the front end.
So it's interesting too, working on the visual layer, which I guess is probably unfairly, but generally considered to be, I guess, more design or at least creative kind of style work. We talk all the time about creative flow. I mean, that's like a big part of the theming and the messaging that we put out is don't interrupt the developers' creative flow. When you do that, you're limiting their productivity. You're forcing them to context switch, which is increasing their stress and their overall cognitive fatigue. And there's neuroscience behind this, right? This isn't theory. But I wonder, again, as front-end developers, is it like a double whammy when your creative flow or your creativity gets broken? Because not only are you thinking about the problems you're solving with the code, but you're also having to think too about how you do your layout and how people are going to interface with the tool. Is it kind of this almost like our creativity gets kind of slapped twice in two different ways? What does that feel like?
Yeah, I think the easy way to summarize that is now that we've been kind of like senior developers, we're more like management at this point. Writing code is like our glory days. The times that I write code the best is when I'm traveling because I have no distractions or very little distractions. When I'm at home, I got kids. I'm like, you just don't get things done, right? But it's also great being in the flow. I focus primarily on the JavaScript, and I can solve a problem. Right now, I'm trying to learn a little bit more WebGL, and I get to sit in a hotel room and I can read and focus on it. So if I can get like 3-4 hours of my head, like that's really what you hope for. That flow process is for 3 to 4 hours.
Yeah.
And my goal per day is get 3 to 4 hours. Like not 8 hours. It's 3 to 4 hours. And if you can get that solid,
That's more than most people.
yeah, that's more than most people. But as far as like creative context, I'll give that to John because we just built a workshop together. I like to get the nuts and bolts in, and then he makes it look pretty. So,
and I love that job. Basically like when I was, back in the day under undergrad, I was like, do I want to do computer science? I want to do graphic design. And this was the 90s. So I'm just like, this web thing looks cool. So I did the web design route initially, and then just my career evolved to development. But it's interesting because like, as far as that cognitive overload goes, it's not only like, am I working in CSS and dealing with, the layout as well as making it work with the JavaScript. But, on the server side, you're basically compiling for the system you're going to run it on that, you've got a Docker image server to run that. And you've got that one thing that runs there, you're great, you're good to go. On the front end, we need to deal with different browsers. So it's just like, at least, it's Chrome and Edge are both Chromium based. Still, there's Firefox or Safari. They're different. They've always been different.
Nobody bothers testing Opera.
Exactly.
I think so, actually.
Yeah. And then it's like, not only that, there's like, thousands of devices, there's different browsers, and then of course, Android has tons of
form factors.
Yeah, all that. So like all that stuff is just like there's constantly thinking about that stuff. So it's just like, in some ways I'm just like, man, I understand there's a ton of challenges on the back end, but like it's one target. Life is good. I'm just like, we're dealing with 1,000 targets on the front end all the time,
That's a really good point. And I mean, I think, too, with the industry kind of evolving so much around mobile, I mean, I remember like 10 years ago or something, probably longer than that, when the statistics started coming out, more than half of people are going to be shopping on their phones. Like, no, they're not. And then like, here we are. It's like, I don't remember the last time I sat down at a laptop or anything to buy something, right? It's always over my, so yeah, there are these, growing challenges. I say bloom in the industry around the amount of code and front end code that has to be written. And it's not like people are looking for crummier interfaces, right?
Yeah.
And I'm always kind of amazed too at the way that design like evolves. Like I was just having this conversation, like logos. Like the McDonald's logo from like 20 years ago is so much crappier looking than the one that has now. And where, it's always a subjective thing, but that level of evolution, you don't have any control over that, right? People are going to have a demand for a certain amount of design, and you're going to have to match that. So no, I really, this is super illuminating. I could sit and talk to you guys all day about this stuff, but we're supposed to be a short program here. So, but maybe let's wrap it up. Why don't you tell me each kind of one maybe big takeaway that you've been able to get from a talk here so far, and maybe how you plan to integrate that with your work when you get back to the kids and the grind and everything like that.
Yeah. My biggest thing is our talk. I mean, obviously we're proud ourselves, right? But we built a workshop for building progressive web apps. So this brings like the web to mobile phones, and like the big reason for wanting to do that this year was because iOS now has push notifications on web. Which I think is a big feature that, a lot of times is why you went native, is because you want to push notifications. And now that it's available for the web, and with mobile phones now being so performant, I think web is a great target to build stuff and kind of can shift the balance away from native apps and doing more web development on phones. So that's what I'm hoping for. That's my big takeaway. And I'm hoping for the next couple of years, like that ramps up and more people see web development as a viable alternative to native app development.
Super interesting. I was a big fan of progressive apps too when they dropped. I thought it was really fascinating. And I was even involved in old JNLP and WebStart stuff back in the day, which is like, similar blueprint at least. So yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, I'll say one talk that I really liked was, so Roger has a talk around basically around, it's the setup for the talk is essentially just like, hey, we want to, all that we do on the front end a lot of times now is using these frameworks that are abstraction layers on parts of JavaScript, which is further abstraction layers. So we're farther away from the core of JavaScript at this point. So he actually goes into this talk that digs into just like, hey, introduce this kind of a simple concept and make that more complicated. And by the end of it, it's basically just, you realize you basically learned how Vue manages reactive updates. And basically he just kind of tricks you to learning this. while just getting further and further away from the abstraction and closer to the actual metal there, which is cool. I think that that's something that's great about this conference. The fact you can actually get deep into a topic and really understand something at the core. I think that's really a big plug for why people should come and check this conference out.
I thought Michael was the magician.
Hey, that was
really Raj.
That was killer, man. No, so well, listen, that's great. I mean, I think a big takeaway from me is that even though you don't have to deal with a build cycle, and even though you're getting that kind of instant feedback, it's not like you don't have headaches and things that can contribute to
We got kids.
yeah, that alone, biggest productivity challenge in the world, right? Ironically. So, but anyway, no, thank you both for your time. It really was an illuminating conversation, and we'll see you at the rest of the show, I guess.
Absolutely, appreciate it.
Thanks all.
Thank you.